everyone, welcome to episode 32 of Business Therapy, a show about helping real professionals solve real business problems. Every week, we invite a guest onto the show to help guide them through the normal pains and setbacks of working through their career. Using a mindfulness-first approach, we help our guests find conscious solutions and help give them the tools to take on challenges that inevitably pop up during the ebbs and flows of business. I'm Sam Joshak, and as always, I'm here with Jonathan Adams. Today on the show, we have Mike Tassone. Did I say that right, Mike?
Yep, Tassone, yep.
Awesome. Tassone, nice to have you on the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your business, and how we can help you today?
Well, my name is Mike Tassone, and I've been a creative in and around Toronto and Ontario and Canada and everywhere up here for probably about 10 years now. And it's about time that, me and my business partner are taking the leap to be our own entity. And what's happening is that we're both kind of feeling that after 10 years of doing this for me anyway, and I'm sure you guys have felt this, and I'm sure anyone listening has felt this, there's a, not significant, but there's quite a bit amount of imposter syndrome creeping in to what we're trying to do. Now, for my end, because I've been at this for so long, so a little bit about me. I've worked as a freelancer, I've worked as an employee, I've worked in banking and education and professional sports and created content across all platforms, across so many different types of avenues that the creating of the doing of the skill is no longer what the imposter syndrome is about. For me, the imposter syndrome is now that because I've been at this as sort of a solopreneur, I'm not confident in the systems that I have to create around the business in order to make it effective. So what I'm noticing is that the systems of trying to create SOPs and trying to, build the pipeline as opposed to carrying buckets, it's something that's sort of new because I've never really had to do it. Everything else has been either on referrals or I've been employed, or in my circle, I've been able to garner enough business to keep me sort of afloat. Now, my business partner is suffering from the other problem where he's new, he's about 2 years in, and his imposter syndrome comes in the form of the skill. So it's not so much the pipeline of around the business, it is the actual skill of doing the thing, right? So we're here today, or I'm here today, to sort of figure out how to work through each of those types of imposter syndromes in order to launch our agency sort of into the next level. Because we have clients who are coming into the door, we're creating our little menu, and it's, those are the fine things. It's that imposter syndrome of both sides that's kind of keeping us like lockstep a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So let's start by talking about imposter syndrome and what that means to you, because in listening to the problem you're having, my first thought is I think imposter syndrome is pretty consistent across both contexts. So it's the same thing you're dealing with. It's just slightly different, domains. But let's talk a little bit more to you in your own words. What does it mean to have it or feel like you have imposter syndrome?
For me personally, it's more like, it's like when you're sitting in the room with someone and you're trying to either negotiate or trying to build a contract, or you're trying to get the scope together. And it's just maybe, I don't want to say lack of confidence, but it's maybe a inability to strategize properly, because I've been an executioner for so long that now I have to think beyond the doing of the skill. And it seems like even though I know the information and I know the proper steps, it just seems like when I'm in the room or I'm getting it together, there's just like this disconnect. And I know that for my business partner, he suffers from the classic of, it's time to sit down, it's time to write or create. I just can't think of anything. I just can't think of the words on the paper. I just can't come up with the voice. I just can't do the thing, even though he's perfectly capable. He suffers from the more classic. So I guess that's what I would say the meaning of it for me and him would be.
So just go ahead.
Go, Sam. Finish it. Go with your thought.
Just to summarize then, it sounds like imposter syndrome to you is you're pretending that you are more competent than you are, or you're trying to put yourself in situations where you claim to have skills that you don't think you fully command. Is that a good summary of what you're feeling?
It's not that I don't have the skill. It's just I almost get like squirrely because I've done it for so long that when I'm put in a new situation, it kind of not falls apart, but it kind of just feels, it doesn't feel right. And I'm trying to figure out, putting together, I know I can do it, but how do we make it an entire package, I guess, is the question.
When you think of imposter syndrome, who's the audience of this gap? So is it just yourself that's feeling that there's something you don't know? Or is it reflected in what you think others are going to think of you or think of you?
It's probably more of that second one. I think it's more of like, I want to come off as professional. I want to come off as knowing what I know. But like I said, for me anyway, when you're the executioner and then it's time to become the strategist, there's like a gap there that I just can't hop. I've done it. It's just now it's time to hop and maybe become the overarching strategist. And it's this weird, like, I don't know what you want. It's a weird fence that's kind of sitting in my way a little bit.
And how does it, and it expresses itself, like the specific problem it's causing is you can't negotiate, or you don't engage in certain conversations you should have, or like, what's the actual, like the result of these thoughts in your head? What's it actually preventing you from doing?
I think the result is not charging enough. And it ends up becoming like when it gets into that murky water of the financials. I laugh too, because there's one specific story when I was younger, when I was about 22 years old. I was sitting in front of a guy that I took as being, he was a football coach, an old football coach. And, those guys are gritty dudes. And it was my first real negotiation for this football series. And I quoted him at a price, and simply by him crossing his arms and leaning back in his chair, he said, "What is this really going to cost me?" I gave him a 50% discount for no reason. And it's things like that now that I'm getting better at, but it's just things of like the perception that is screwing with me a little bit moving forward as I get further into my career and as I build the agency.
And let's say in the example of not charging enough, do you go into the conversation with a specific number or value that you think the service is worth and then don't bring it up? Or do you not even entertain exactly what you think you should be asking for?
It's, what, now that you brought it up, it's probably, I go in thinking of the value that I'm providing, and I go in and I go, you know what, the market kind of allows for this. There's a range here, right? And then almost off the hop, I automatically go to the lowest part of the scale. And then from there, I'm negotiating. If I were to get what I want, I'm only getting the lowest part of the scale, right? And then we end up negotiating into spaces where I'm like, well, man, is it even worth it at that point, right? But I want to do it so bad because I'm still in that executioner mindset of wanting to do it. I love the work that, we end up negotiating in a scale that's sort of like, it's silly at that point, right?
So essentially you're negotiating with yourself and you haven't brought in the client into the picture yet.
Essentially, I guess. Yeah, that'd probably be a good way to put it, because I'm kind of just, no matter what, I'm just negotiating with myself the entire time, and maybe not even taking into account what they're talking about. They get a deal because, like I said, sometimes that scale slips, right? But yeah, maybe that's part of it too, is maybe I'm just not even bringing them into the picture early enough, I guess.
Yeah.
And ultimately, though, because we could have a really fruitful conversation on pricing and negotiations. And I think that's kind of a symptom, though, of you consider this a root cause issue of you don't feel confident enough to associate strongly what you think you're worth with external parties, or when you're pressed, you feel that imposter syndrome coming on. Is that kind of how the situations relate to one another? Like if somebody presses you and they kind of give you that look, or they scrutinize what you think you're worth or what you're offering, you feel that sort of lack of confidence that makes you kind of back away from originally what you wanted to propose. Is it tied back to that same situation?
It's not a lack of confidence. It would be, I sort of get into this mode of like, maybe they know more than me on the topic, or maybe they, maybe they've worked with someone in the past that have done it this way, and I'm trying to do it sort of my way and the way I bring value. So it's not a confidence thing. It's more of a, maybe they know something that I don't. So let's pay attention to what they've got to say. And then rather quickly, it sort of kind of goes to the point of, okay, well, they seem to know what they want out of this. Let's continue with what they want. And then the ball really shifts where I'm kind of playing in their court the whole time, right? So maybe it's just a fancy way of saying I'm a bad negotiator, but these are the things that I'm sort of dealing with, stepping up these days anyway.
I think what we're starting to articulate, though, is I would distinguish between the thoughts you're having in your head and the actions you're taking, because you can have imposter syndrome and everybody suffers it to varying degrees. But the question is specifically in any given activity. So like we're speaking about pricing or something very specific, but I would say it's the same across the board. Like if it's negotiating with a client, what is the imposter syndrome stopping you from doing? Or what is it that you're supposed to be doing? So like you can start to attack the reasons you're feeling the way you're feeling, and we can talk about some techniques for that. But then there's also just the activity you need to do. And you want to look for in a concrete way, where is that activity deviating from what it should be? So in this case, if the thoughts in your head are stopping you from actually even having a negotiation or even actually explaining what your value is, like that's the tactical thing that you need to look at without regard to that voice in your head, because as a practical matter, you still need to do these activities.
Sure. Yeah.
And sometimes through doing activities, we start feeling confident. So I think you can attack imposter syndrome both ways, but I would always recommend keeping it simple to start and saying, what is specifically this doing, or what's the result of it, of my imposter syndrome? And okay, what should be my actions? Because usually we know that answer. We usually know, like, if you just take a step back and get rid of all that noise in our head, like, what should I have done here? And
right. Yeah.
And as opposed to like what we've convinced ourselves. So Sam, I don't know if I accelerated to a point past some of the interrogation, but
I don't think so at all. I was just, there's a lot of stuff going on, Mike, with what you're describing. And I agree fully with Jonathan that if you want practical advisement, like he said, any sort of retrospective or debriefing or postmortem for those kind of meetings you're talking about or interactions with external parties, being able to be self-aware that could have gone better and make a promise to yourself that I'm going to do one thing better next time, or I'm going to focus on changing one thing to be a more positive effect that aligns with the professional you want to be. That's one way you can kind of tackle the symptoms, and you can start to have a plan so that you can bend your behavior and retrain yourself in the right direction. Now, one of the things that I wanted to bring up at this point in the conversation is what you're actually discussing at a very broad level is a very fascinating and very expansive topic on balancing confidence versus humility is the way I'm going to describe it.
Okay.
And I think that's where a lot of the imposter syndrome in people that I normally talk to comes from, which is we're in a society that values, especially in younger people, humility to an extremely high extent. And humility at its core is a practice of being self-aware and acknowledging that you don't know everything and that there's a lot of room to learn. And it almost seems that that's always an opposing force to being confident and being able to step into a room and know what you know and being able to articulate what you know and to be assertive and to be pushing that on people because that's what they want from you. They want your expertise. They want to feel taken care of. So when you talk about those two and you think about it that way, one should definitely be expected to be humble, especially when they're young or at any point in their career. And one should also expect to be confident and not leave room for, error or weakness or being unsure. So how do we balance those two things? Well, I think a lot of the intersection of where people try to balance those things results in imposter syndrome, which is you're putting yourself into situations using confidence, but then at the same time, you've been trained and you're trying to also simultaneously display humility and leave an opening for humility. And those two things, when they're not balanced or you're not sure what you're trying to do, and you've got those two forces in your body that are countering each other, imposter syndrome in some way, shape, or form is typically the result. So let's sit and process that for a minute. Does that speak to you at all?
That's an interesting point. I've never really thought of the humility point of view in terms of like, maybe that's what you're trying to battle both sides of like, no, I know what I'm talking about, but I also am trying to be humble about it, I guess. Right. And it's like a battle going on constantly.
Yeah, because you're trained to do both.
Right.
Especially when you go from execution, like you've been talking about, and trying to run a business how do you become an assertive leader and a humble leader at the same time? Because one would expect, and one has been trained typically to think both are positive things. So how do you balance those things? And if you don't understand that you need to balance those things and have a strategy to it, you're going to end up in a lot of confusion where you're constantly putting yourself out there and pulling yourself back, and putting yourself out there and pulling yourself back, because you don't want to be seen as cocky or arrogant. And this push and pull, it's a struggle that a lot of people, I think, have to grapple with in their jobs and also in their personal lives.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point about the humility. Yeah. Trying to battle. Now, how do you battle that in real time? So in the negotiation or in the conversation or in, whatever you're in, how do you battle that in real time? And obviously it takes a lot of practice and a lot of, negotiating and a lot of like real world application. But I guess, how do you balance that in real time?
I would say by being very clear what your value is and what you are relative to that value, without getting hung up on all the things that you're not. So if you're negotiating for something, what is it that is specifically being purchased from you? Because it's not being perfect across every dimension, especially all the ones that you're comparing yourself, that you find yourself lacking. But if you're very clear on what your scope is, and this is not just for selling, this could be in your job, it could be anything.
Mm-hmm.
You're very clear about that scope. Well, now it's not mythical. Like now you're not like fighting mythical beasts of like amazing capability across every dimension. Like, this one's so good at presenting, I'm bad at presenting. This one's so good. And you start thinking about, wait, but what is my value? What are they actually buying from me? And do I have gaps in that? Honestly, and you have to have humility there.
Mm-hmm.
Or do I actually fit the bill there? And then these other things I could work on, but it's not all equal. But if you're not very clear, let's say an example of selling, or if you think you should get a promotion or whatever it is, if you're not very clear on what your value is and where you are relative to that, that's, I think, when you start getting really confused.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you may not have, whether or not you've done strategy before or whatever those extra dimensions are, the question is, what are you selling? And what's someone buying from you? And if you're clear on that, then the other things are tactical considerations, like maybe how I could strategize better, how I could say whatever. But if you're clear on what you're selling, then you can price it. You can't price all these things that you also think you're not good at.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I guess, you guys cleared that one up pretty quick. The humility thing, that's a very interesting point of you're battling both sides of it.
Well, and if you'd let me, I'll add. So Jonathan's point is, it's again bringing back to that self-awareness first, which is always knowing what you know and what you have to offer and what you're talking to. That's the confidence piece.
Mm-hmm.
So now when we talk about humility piece, I'm going to zoom up, and now I'm going to go back to the like abstract level again for a minute. The concept of duality, or the way I would define duality, of the existence of two things simultaneously, is very hard for people to process. So in this case, to combat imposter syndrome, you really want, when you talk about balancing, you think about, okay, how do I balance humility and confidence at the same time, thinking about their opposing forces, and if one must take away from the other. When you think about the principle of duality, when you grapple with things like consciousness and mindfulness, it's the ability to understand that both can be equally strong at the same time. And that's really where I personally, in my journey, have found that I've been able to combat and actually remove a lot of imposter syndrome, because you can be infinitely humble and infinitely confident in the same moment. And I'll explain sort of the logic behind that. And it starts with what Jonathan said, which is, first, you know what you know. And of what you know, there could be an infinite things you don't know, but of what you do know, confidence, you should wield it like you were the most arrogant and cocky person on the planet. Like, not like from a personality, and you don't want to act a butthead.
Yeah.
But the thing is, of what you know, it's okay to know it and to wield it and to be extremely confident about it. Simultaneously, at the same time, you can be always aware that there's an infinite amount of things you do not know and can never know. And there's an infinite amount of things that people can do better than you, and you can always be taught. It doesn't matter if you're 80 years old and you've done this for 60 years or whatever it is, or you're the master of your craft. it doesn't mean that there's not a space for humility or the ability to learn or the ability to learn on the fly or admit that you don't know everything or admit that you're wrong. Both wielded simultaneously is sort of, it means that at any point in your life, in your career, wherever you're at, you can be extremely confident. But in the same moment, if something happens in the environment where it comes to the point where you have to be honest about, I don't know this, or that's something that I could learn, or this is something I'm confident I could go learn and I don't know it right now, being confident with your not knowing things too, and being able to wield them at the same time is that balance. Like, one who is overconfident is not one who is receptive to learning. It is somebody who's not humble, and that is typically taken badly. One who is extremely confident, who at the same time can always be instructed, who can always be taught, who is always open to having a conversation with clients, colleagues, subordinates when you're starting a company, that is somebody who's also a humble leader. But that humility does not take away from their confidence. So in a way, the duality of wielding both simultaneously is the skill at the level we're talking that's going to defeat imposter syndrome, because you can't be an imposter if you always know what you know and you're always open to knowing more. Then you're only who you are at any given point in time. Does that make sense? Hopefully that's not too abstract.
No, that was great. Actually, being confident in what you know will prevent those monsters from creeping in, right? Because if you know it, then essentially no one can really take that away from you, even if they know the same thing, right? That's an interesting point too. I like the way that you spun that. And then I guess from the execution standpoint, so
if I could just add, Mike, I just want to
go
add
ahead.
a little bit
Please
more,
do.
because I think this is this applies to so many of our listeners. For me, imposter syndrome is just an inability to be present at the end of the day, because you're responding to what isn't reality. And you're also completely unable to be what you are if you're thinking about what you are at the same time. So if you're in a negotiation, you can't be present, actually listen to what's being said to you. You won't even have the opportunity to see where someone's reacting favorably, where there's questions, where you could be learning something in that moment. So you won't even have that opportunity to say, like if someone like Einstein, if someone came up to Einstein and said, X, Y, Z, and he said, oh, I don't know what that is. No one's going to say, Einstein, you're dumb. They're going to say, wow, he's so confident because he could say what he doesn't know because everyone knows he knows so much.
Right.
But even people who have clearly attained a certain level, like I think it's Meryl Streep famously said, like every time she does a movie, she wonders, why would anyone watch her act? Can feel imposter syndrome no matter what level you get up to. Yeah. So there's an inherent inability to ever compare to something that's in your mind, because your mind can always grow it, shrink it, make it something else, morph it, etc. So that's why when I think of imposter syndrome, I'm always trying to tether it to as much reality as possible and get out of your head as much as possible. Because, like if we always compare ourselves to ourselves on some level, what we think we should be at any given moment, but it's so unfruitful and it's so unproductive. And it robs us of every opportunity we're ever going to have to actually be what we hope to be. So, because you have to be what you are at all times, and so that's why I'm saying, like, just being honest with yourself and what your capability is. And at some point you could become comfortable, even in real time in a negotiation, to be transparent about what you're not. But you can't be transparent about what you think you're lacking that has only everything to do with you and not the person who's purchasing your service, for example. So, like, in other words, like it'd be gratuitous for you to say, I switched to, now I'm doing strategy and I haven't done that. Like, it has nothing to do with the conversation. That's all in your head. Because if someone's purchasing something from you, what your journey has been and where you think you got to where you are has nothing to do with the conversation. It's almost like you're apologizing for your journey on some level.
Right.
When meanwhile, if you're very clear about why you're in that meeting, why they're in that meeting, then all of that, it can all go on. You can work on it, but you can tether it to something very, very specific. And the answer is binary. Like, either I believe I have value and they should purchase from me or not. I'll give you one more example. I was once in competition with a service provider, and in my head, I was attributing all this capability to the other service provider, and just creating this mythical, unbeatable group. And then I thought, okay, wait, would this company, that with this potential customer, be better served by me providing the service or this competitor? And then I said, oh, me for sure. I was like, why? Why did I think I should be the one? Because I'm conscientious of what, now you're starting to get into something that's a lot more real. And that's the conversation you should be having, not the one of like, what are all the possible capabilities or benefits of using someone else? Like, because that's not real. What's real is like what you actually think you can deliver. And then you even start realizing, wait, I actually know this market and I know why they should work with me. That's a real conversation.
That's an interesting point that you just brought up about thinking about sort of asking yourself, why are they going with me? Right? You kind of brought up something.
Not why should they go?
Why should they? Sorry. Yeah. Why?
It's not a passive,
right.
Like you don't want to be like, you don't want to say, well, whatever you think, everybody. No, you're the one who's the expert.
Right.
In other words, like, regardless of whether or not people see the value, the first step is you have to know the value. You have to know what you're capable of.
Right. Yeah. And I think that comes with, like I said, the years of people coming to me in terms of like having I've had a pretty successful, what do you call it? A referral over the years, right? Referral program, I guess, where people, I've worked with one person and they've told another person. So people have already been coming to me with the expectation of like, oh, he knows exactly what's going on. He knows exactly what he's doing. Let's let him tell us what we need, right? And years of that, you sort of get used to that. Now I'm taking on the new endeavor, which I think is the natural progression, right? Once you've sort of freelanced a little bit and then you've been an employee, big companies, small companies, I think the natural progression is like making that next step to doing your own thing, having your own name on the door, right? Now it's time for me to go convince people, or maybe not convince, but go sell myself and say, hey, this is what I'm bringing to the table. This is what I've got going on. What do you think about that? And I think that right there, you nailed it a little bit, where you're always thinking about all the other people in the room or all the other services where you're actually the one that could do the best job in your opinion. That was it. Yeah.
And if you don't know something, if you don't know what the market is, you're treat it as a gap that you can like, okay, now I know I need to learn about X, and how can I learn about X, as opposed to this is some amorphous thing or blob that I can never attack. So like what I'm saying is, if you can't answer the question fully, why someone should go with you, and I know we're being tactical about pricing, but it's like, why should you be the one to get the promotion? Why should you be the one to lead the team? Whatever it is, if you can't answer that, think about what is the gap and look to rectify it, but don't attempt to battle what doesn't exist, what's not real, or what you've only created in your head. And that's where most of, I think, imposter syndrome lives.
Yeah. And the logic, again, if you want to start practicing it to this point of, you will never know. The gap is always infinite. You can only know what you know. If your logic is such that you want to seek confidence by knowing the things you don't know, you will never be confident. It's impossible. You will never know everything you need to know. You have to logically orient yourself about, like Jonathan saying, the gap can be scoped. Like, okay, there's a need right now, and I don't have all the information I can perceive that I could have, and you can tackle that tactically in a given context. But this idea of achieving confidence by having more experience, by having more knowledge, by having more, you will never be satisfied. You have to reorient the way that your mind works around that, because everything that you have that would enable you to be confident in a given moment in the present, you have it right now within you. There is nothing more that you will ever have than what you have right now, no matter the context, because the gap in what you could have or could know will always be infinite relative to what you could possibly have.
Right. But I mean, I'll caveat that with like, what I was mentioning was like more a technical skill. So like, if someone wants you to be able to market across XYZ dimensions, and you've only have experience with X, the other things are something you can learn, and that is a gap. In other words, like, so that is actually something that I would never say a gap of like, you're the best or worst, or, like that, where it's qualifying what it is, as opposed to the thing itself. That's different.
I'm aligned, and I'll reiterate, I think, and even it's kind of weird to call it a gap, because it's really just, there's always more you can have for a given situation, and you can scope it out conscientiously and then go and achieve that. You can tell clients, I haven't done that before. I will go learn that if you think it's worth it to do. And you can set targets. but it has nothing to do with your confidence, because it doesn't matter if you've been doing it for 10, 20, 40 years. If you've had 3 businesses or this is your first one, you're going to learn every time.
Right.
You're never going to have the toolbox that's perfectly there. You're never going to have every ingredient for the recipe. It's always going to be, your entire life will just be a process of building and learning and looking at your edges. It will never change. So that's why the entire imposter syndrome thing is like, you've got what you've got, and it will never be different in the present.
And imagine if you went into that business, that meeting and said, and thought, my value proposition, even articulated, is that I am not out there. There are a lot of hustlers out there who are just selling capability that they don't even exist. I'm so focused on making sure I'm delivering value that I'm telling you right now, I don't have X capability that you just asked about, but I'm the right guy to get it for you and price it correctly because of how conscientious I am. That's a sales. That's authentic. And that is actually what will resonate with people, because that's how they trust. Whereas if you're sitting in your head the whole time, you start squirming because you don't have X capability, and you don't talk about any of that other stuff because you think that makes you look like you have a gap, et cetera. That's where things go south. So I'll try finding a better term than gap, can be used as a strength if you're very clear about what your value is. And that could include something like how conscientious you are.
Right. I've heard the expression jump and build the plane on the way down. I don't know if you guys have heard that one. That's something that was told to me a long time ago.
I don't know if that's a truism.
Yeah. No, that, yeah, in terms of what I go through, that, yeah, that's you kind of hit all the nails there. In terms of just, yeah, what Sam said, and then this, what Jon just said too. And then the other side of the coin, I guess I want to address, is the imposter syndrome that comes with the executing of the skill. So the sitting down and the going, okay, I need to write this page, I need to make this spreadsheet, whatever it is. How does one get over the mental block of, I guess, questioning your ability to do the actual work?
Yeah, it's really no different, in my opinion, from everything we've talked about, because in a way, everything is execution in life. So you talk about executing a thing, everything that you're doing, executing a meeting with a client, executing a business, executing the management of employees, it's all the same principles. So for your colleague, when they're talking about having a block in execution, it's very much, I think, if we get down to a very technical level, it's what Jonathan was describing, when the ability to do things presently is the ability to do them with whatever knowledge you have and not think about it at the same time. If you're constantly thinking about, can I do this? It would be like riding a bike. And when you're riding it, thinking the whole time you're riding, am I sure I know how to ride this bike? Could I be riding this better? Is there a different way to ride it? That kind of thought process would interfere with the ability to actually ride the bike. And in a lot of situations, people who actually know how to do things through muscle memory, the more they think about it while they're trying to do it, the more it actually does disrupt the body and the knowledge from actually being manifested. So in a way, the very simple advisement for anyone who's blocked on execution is think less and just do more. Just start writing, just start drawing, just start actually moving energy through your body. Because the more you sit there and think about the task at hand, or if you can do the task, or if you're the right person for the task, that's time that's not spent doing the thing. Now, there's going to come a time where for everybody, and again, everybody at every skill and experience level, that you're going to reach your edges, or you're trying to conceive of an output that you can't physically do because you don't have the skills or you don't have the knowledge. And all you have to do is start getting used to these patterns of, I'm going to do using what I can do. And if you run into roadblocks, or you find yourself getting inefficient, or your energy flow slowing down, that's a signal to go out and learn, to go out and read, to research, to actually watch other people do it, to find ways to expand your own knowledge, and then get back to the doing. And the analog there would be, if I'm riding my bike and I want to learn how to ride it faster for longer distances, you can get out there every day and still ride your bike with what you know. But if you're having trouble reaching the goal, it might be time to go talk to a more expert biker, or watch videos on biking, or learn new tools and capabilities to bring back into your tool set. But the most unproductive thing you can do is try to do something and wonder if you have the capability to do it or not. You can do it halfway and realize it's not what you wanted and go expand yourself, or you can not do it. But there's no sitting there and just thinking about whether it can be done or not. It's the part that is the challenging part, and it's the part that drains people mentally and morally.
And it's introducing a crazy constraint of, I need X to be eligible to do Y. Like, so in other words, like, so before I even engage in anything, I'm going to assume that I'm missing something and it's in my head and it's not anything very specific. Whereas part of doing something could be learning how to do part of doing something. Like
Right.
that's equally a part of execution. Why not? Like, otherwise, like, it presumes that we reach a certain level of expertise and then we're done and now we can just do. Like, it's not binary like that. It's a cycle. So hopefully, if you're doing things that are exciting, you're always learning and incorporating that learning. So you should always have some, it's not a gap. You should always have some opportunity, that exists in what you're doing.
Yeah. Self-evolution it has to be iterative. And that's where I think a lot of people, if you have a task in front of you, and this is very tactical and from my own experience, and even if you feel like you don't have all the tools to do it, sitting there and trying to grasp into the universe about what tools, what learning do I need before you even attempt it is a very difficult exercise. Even if going in, you might not be fully equipped for the job, do it with what you know first and find your edges through the execution, find your edges through the creation. And when you find actually in the moment what the gap is, then go educate, take a pause and go learn and then iterate and then try the task again. But the biggest thing that's tough for a lot of people is if they don't feel confident, if they feel an imposter syndrome at the beginning, or they're looking into a big task, it's very hard at that point without having dug into the task to decide, what am I missing? Where's my tool set? Because like Jonathan said, if you're confident that you can learn and take on any task through, even if you need to learn new skills in the middle of it, then the only thing that's going to help you move forward is to always start. Just start with what you have and explore, and know that it will be an iterative, creative process typically. And that's for masters, even. That's the people at all levels of skill.
Yeah.
And you have to be very, sorry.
No, go ahead. Please, no, continue. Yeah, please.
You also have to be very, very careful about what standard you're setting to say that I have X capability. Because like I said, with Meryl Streep example, like, you can, no matter how capable you are, you could always believe that you're incapable, you're not fully capable, or lack something. The greatest composers of all time might not have been good at symphonies, but amazing across the board and everything else. Like, so like that's always going to be the case. And so if the standard is in your head, but not specific to the task that you're trying to do, you will always lose all your energy. It has to be very specific. Like, in what way am I lacking, or do I have an opportunity to know more to be able to execute this more specifically? And when you start listing them, they become pretty ridiculous, usually. So you really want to be very fit to task, like what is missing. And half the time it's, I don't know X. It's like, well, can you learn that? Yes. Well, then that's not a gap. Like, that's something you can do.
Do more, think less.
Do more, think less. And then I guess the final rounding out here is, once you get into this world a little bit, especially in the creative world, there's a lot of people that are kind of like, I've got a lot of friends that are trying things out, and they're on TikTok and they're doing Instagram and things like that. And it seems like now there's a big push, and I think it's always been like this, but the fake it till you make it kind of mentality. What are your opinions on people who take on that mentality in starting whatever they want, whether you're a car mechanic, whether you're a creative, a video producer, a plumber, whatever? What's your take on the general notion of the fake it till you make it phenomenon?
I would start by being super careful about the label you're putting on it, because what does it mean faking it? Because you're already labeling something as negative. That's very inclusive and broad. Same thing like when you say I'm not an expert in something. Like, in other words, you have to be very, very specific, because I would say faking is just another way of being in your head. But Sam, you were starting to say something, so I was
starting to say the same thing. I don't like the term. I think that even when I was younger and more hungry in my career, I used that, and I actually there was a time where I prescribed it to people, which is but faking implies lying and lack of transparency, and that never helps you meet your goals. So what we talked about earlier with balancing confidence and humility, a lot of times it's not faking until you making it. The same actual action in real life is saying yes and being honest that you have the capacity to do whatever it is that the client wants. And that's a different mentality, but it is a more positive spin on what ends up faking it till you make it actually ends up looking like, which is just I agree to do this, and whatever it takes to succeed, I will. And I promise I will dedicate the resources and the time to make it work. And faking it is not really a part of that. It really just implies that like there's a level of lying that has to trick people into accepting that, but you don't want that in your process. You want to tell people, here's what I know today. I'm confident that if there's anything I don't know that would block me from doing what you need, I will be the person to do it. And I will do it at the best price or the fairest price, or you can just guarantee that I'm aware of my own capability in this moment while I'm talking to you, and I will supplement them until we make it. So it's really just agree and then fulfill would be the real, what I would say, instead of fake it till you make it.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, okay.
Process, right?
Yeah.
And it's, again, fit to task. So, a lot of times when you think of faking to make it, you're at a junior level as opposed to some senior expert of something, or, been around, or CEO versus someone, who's just starting in the company or something. But depending on what the task is, a lot of times I would prefer, knowing what I know, that a junior person handles something, because they're learning. They're going to apply the skills exactly in real time, as opposed to someone who's just applying broad experience, or might not be as attentive to detail, et cetera. So like there's a utility in being at an early stage of something that, if you're transparent about, actually could resonate and work very, very well. But it will never resonate if you're thinking of it as, well, I'm faking it because I've never done something before. That has nothing to do with it. Do you have the capability, as Sam said, to be able to do it? Because let's say if you've never managed somebody, that's you're not faking it by starting to be a manager. You're in fact the manager. What you're saying is that I'm early on the level of the skill set here, or my experience, or failing, or whatever. But if you're transparent about it and saying, I'm going to learn, I'm going to do this right, then you're not faking, but if you suddenly come in as a new manager, and say, okay, I'm not going to show fear, I'm not going to show like I don't know anything or something like that, that's never going to work. That's never going to resonate. That faking will always fail.
Right. Yeah. 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 I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, because it's rampant in the world that we operate in, and just seeing people kind of, social media's got a way of framing things for people and going, hey, how are they doing that? You're putting in the work and you're going, I'm nowhere near that. And, just peel back the layers a little bit and you start realizing, maybe it's not as tight. Maybe it's not the bolts aren't as tight as you think they are, right? At the end of the day. So I want to get two experts' thoughts on that whole phenomenon.
Yeah, happy to talk about it.
Yeah.
So how are you feeling, Mike? I know we've dropped a lot of that kind of heavy stuff on you. How are you feeling about your original question?
Good. A lot better now. Now that whole humility and confidence thing was kind of a shot to the chin, because it's you kind of articulated something that it's there, and you're trying to you're trying to figure out what the hell it is, and you just kind of said it. You and Jon both kind of just you beat it down to the atom, and you go, man, it's the humility, it's the confidence. You got to find that balance, but that's also what you're fighting against as well, right? Especially you're young, you're trying to kind of get something off the ground. That one I'm gonna tattoo on my forearm for sure.
Well, then you can post it as a comment, and hopefully it will encourage other people.
Definitely.
Well, I'm glad, Mike, that it seems like you got something out of it. You got some stuff to think about. Do you have any other last burning questions for us for today's session?
I think you guys nailed it. I think you guys nailed everything today. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on the show. And thanks everyone for listening. And as always, if anyone has any comments or you'd like to come on the show, don't hesitate to reach out. Other than that, we'll see you next week.